Consider this before viewing the Autobiography of Malcolm X. Discuss what you already know about Malcolm X from books or films. What do you know about the time in which he lived? While watching the program, notice the changes that he makes in his life as well as in his name. Look for the influences that moved him to become a leader and the personal traits that drew so much attention to him. Assignment Discovery now presents the Autobiography of Malcolm X.
We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American.
Malcolm X both inspired and terrified a nation.
We are peaceful people. We are loving people. We love everybody who loves us. But we don't love anybody who doesn't love us.
As controversial as he was eloquent, he was a man known by his words. But Malcolm X's most important words were not delivered before a crowd. His most forceful call for freedom and justice is his own life story, the Autobiography of Malcolm X.
When my mother was pregnant with me, she told me later, a party of hooded Ku Klux Klan riders galloped up to our home in Omaha, Nebraska one night, surrounding the house, brandishing their shotguns and rifles. They shouted for my father to come out.
From its very first sentence, the Autobiography of Malcolm X is full of violence and conflict, foreshadowing the turbulent life to come. If it were fiction, it would be called a cautionary tale, an adventure story, a tragedy.
In a way, it can be looked at as a slave narrative. And the slave narrative, of course, is the primary way that African Americans have foisted their reality and their consciousness onto the literary scene in this country. And like all the other slave narratives, the Autobiography of Malcolm X is a struggle, a journey towards liberation.
And like a slave narrative, this story is told in the first person. But curiously, the book had two authors, Malcolm X and a young writer who would later become a household name, Alex Haley. The two men met for the first time in 1959, when Haley approached Malcolm for an interview. Their first encounter at the Muslim restaurant in Harlem was tense.
When my purpose was made known, he bristled, his eyes skewering me from behind the horn-rimmed glasses. "You're another one of the white man's tools sent to spy." I told him I had a legitimate writing assignment and showed him my letter from the magazine stating that an objective article was wanted. Malcolm snorted that no white man's promise was worth the paper it was on.
Despite the rocky start, Haley did eventually get his interview and later two more for other national magazines. These interviews eventually led to their historic collaboration on the autobiography. Malcolm X is born Malcolm Little, May 19, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska, to Reverend Earl Little, a Baptist minister from Georgia, and Louise Little, an immigrant from Grenada. For most of Malcolm's childhood, the family lives in Lansing, Michigan.
Malcolm's mother and father were both part of the UNIA, United Negro Improvement Association, with Marcus Garvey. And so what was interesting and important is that they were part of this aggregation of black people who saw nationalism as their only route of escape from this wasteland of white supremacy in this country.
While the family's link with Garvey instills racial pride in the 7 children, it also subjects the household to attacks by white supremacists. Malcolm's earliest memory is of the torching of his house when he was only 4. The family clings together for as long as they can. But when Malcolm is 6 years old, his father is violently killed. 6 years later, his mother suffers a mental collapse and is committed to a state hospital. Louise's children are separated and cast into the foster care system. At first, Malcolm excels in school. He's elected class president, despite being the only black student in the class. He begins to think of one day becoming a lawyer. But his dream is snuffed out in a single conversation with his English teacher.
He kind of half smiled and said, "Malcolm, one of life's first needs is for us to be realistic. A lawyer? You need to think about something you can be. Why don't you plan on carpentry?" It was then that I began to change inside.
After 8th grade, Malcolm moves to Boston to live with an older sister and her family. Soon, Malcolm is lured by the city's flashy nightlife. He picks up the nickname Detroit Red and gets a job shining shoes at the Roseland State Ballroom. In time, Malcolm makes his way to Harlem, the capital of Black Highland. Thrilled by the fast pace and the fast life, he's seduced by Harlem's many charms. Malcolm becomes a drug dealer, using his quick wits and charm to excel at it. But before long, Malcolm is using drugs as well as selling them. A sizable portion of the autobiography is devoted to this part of Malcolm X's life. In recounting his life, he felt he had to reveal how low he'd sunk to show how far he'd come. He also knew that his experience was unexceptional.
I hope that the objective reader, in following my life, the life of only one ghetto-created Negro, may gain a better picture and understanding of the black ghettos which are shaping the lives and the thinking of almost all of the 22 million Negroes who live in America.
Malcolm X is arrested in 1945. Convicted on 14 burglary counts. He is sentenced to 10 years. When he goes to prison, he's 20 years old and not yet shaving. By the time he was writing his autobiography, Malcolm did not see his arrest as bad luck. He believed if he had not gone to jail, he would surely have been killed by drugs or his enemies. In prison, Malcolm Little's life is dramatically changed by religion. Here he rebuilds himself from a criminal to a well-read and devout intellectual.
I think that that's important, that you see his journey. He did not arrive full-blown. He was not born Malcolm X. He became Malcolm X. And so that the first part of the book, with all of its degradation, with all of its loss, with all of its essential tragedy, is crucial to an understanding of the triumphs that follow.
Malcolm X's life can be seen as a rags to riches story, in which the riches are spiritual ones. It's in prison that he first learns about a religious sect called the Nation of Islam. It's based on Orthodox Islam, a major world religion with nearly 1 billion followers. But the American version added a layer of black nationalism, teaching that African Americans should have nothing to do with whites. The Nation of Islam stressed racial pride and abstinence from alcohol, meat, and most entertainment. Its message of separatism struck a chord with many disaffected blacks in the U.S., including Malcolm X. In jail, Malcolm also begins his love affair with words. He reads and studies voraciously, even copying the entire dictionary by hand.
The way that Malcolm found words saved his life in prison. He's like a drowning man who is trying to learn how to swim. The words become life rafts. Reading becomes a way to save his soul, to recapture his life.
Every night at about 10 p.m. I would be outraged with the lights out. It always seemed to catch me right in the middle of something engrossing. Fortunately, right outside my door was a corridor light that cast a glow into my room. So when lights out came, I would sit on the floor where I could continue reading in that glow.
After 7 years, Malcolm is released from prison in 1952. He has changed tremendously, but still more changes are to come. He moves to Detroit and becomes active in the Nation of Islam temple there, quickly moving up in rank. He grows close to the movement's leader, Elijah Muhammad, whom he credits with saving his life.
I would like to present to you the man of the hour.
Soon, the man born Malcolm Little and called Detroit Red changes his name again.
The X replaces the unknown name, our African name, that we've lost during slavery. The slave master just scratched that out. Everyone had a name.
What was your name? It couldn't have been Smith or Jones or Bunch or Powell. That wasn't your name. They don't have those kind of names where you and I came from. No, what was your name?
Malcolm X begins traveling all over the country establishing temples, and the Nation of Islam grows rapidly. He eventually settles in New York, becoming minister of Harlem's Temple No. 7.
Malcolm X was often underestimated because people thought he's just a guy on the street corner, but he made that street corner the center of the black universe.
And I remember walking with him sometimes through the streets of Harlem, and people would come up to him, and he would talk to them in street language, you're strung out, and you need a fix, you need it bad, and I know it. And this is what the white man has brought you to. But rather than fight the white man, you'd rather destroy yourself, so you want some more drugs, right? I understand that. But then he would say, but there's another way, man. I've been there. I used to push drugs, but I'm pushing something else now.
In 1956, Malcolm meets Sister Betty X, an intense young nursing student who teaches women's hygiene at the temple. In 1958, they're married. As they begin their family, the couple has little time to adjust to married life. Soon, Malcolm X will become one of the most controversial public figures in America.
The climate at the time of Malcolm and his utterances was the climate of intimidation, oppression, segregation, prejudice against black people.
Until this time, Malcolm X was little known outside the Muslim movement, but that would change almost overnight.
Last week on Newsbeat,
word of the growing phenomenon reached a young journalist who hosted a local news magazine.
First time I heard the name of Malcolm X, first time I heard the name of Elijah Muhammad was back in, I guess, June or May of 1959. A fellow by the name of Lou Lomax, who was working with me at that time as a reporter, he said, I think I have a story that might interest you, Mike. What's that? Nation of Islam. What's that?
You, Lou, and we'll be back with you in just a moment.
Lomax and Wallace produced a documentary called The Hate That Hate Produced on black nationalist groups in New York.
There is no salvation in Christianity for black.
The program introduced the Nation of Islam and its leader, Elijah Muhammad. It was also Malcolm X's television debut, and he was an instant star.
You can go to any little Muslim child and ask him where is hell or who is the devil, and he wouldn't tell you that hell is down in the ground or that the devil is something invisible that you can't see. He'll tell you hell is right where he has been catching it, and he'll tell you the one who is responsible for him having received this hell is the devil.
Elijah Muhammad was not a very persuasive, certainly not a charismatic figure, and Malcolm was all of that and more.
In 1963, Alex Haley approached the now famous Malcolm X about telling his life story.
He said, I'll agree. I think my life story may help people to appreciate how Elijah Muhammad salvages black people.
The two began meeting in Haley's Greenwich Village studio. At the start, the project seemed doomed.
Malcolm X keeping him at distance at first, speaking only in the broadest of terms and speaking about Elijah Muhammad. And then finally, Alex Haley said, well, hold on. This is your story. We don't heard what Elijah Muhammad said. But what do you say? What do you think?
When their collaboration began, neither man knew where their work would lead. What they did know was that time was of the essence. Theirs was the unusual job of documenting a life as it unfolded. Malcolm X became an important voice in the national debate on racial justice, although he was definitely not a part of the civil rights movement. He was a harsh critic of Martin Luther King Jr. and the strategy of nonviolent protest, which he saw as begging the white man for God-given rights.
Martin Luther King Jr. was considered the most wild, the most reckless, the most willfully disregarding of American society black man until the rise of Malcolm X. So the thing is that he made Martin Luther King Jr. look good by comparison.
Malcolm X was making history, but he was also doing what he did best, changing. As the spokesman of the Nation of Islam, he still loudly accused the white man of being a devil. But privately, his thinking had begun to evolve. In his epilogue, Alex Haley gives us a valuable glimpse of this transition.
One day, in his car, we had stopped for the red light at an intersection. Another car, with a white man driving, had stopped alongside. And when this white man saw Malcolm X, he instantly called across to him, "I don't blame your people for turning to you. If I were a Negro, I'd follow you too. Keep up the fight." Malcolm X said to the man very sincerely, "I wish I could have a white chapter of the people I meet like you." The light changed, and as both cars drove on, Malcolm X quickly said to me, firmly, "Not only don't write that, never repeat it. Mr. Muhammad would have a fit." The significant thing about the incident, I later reflected, was that it was the first time I had ever heard him speak of Elijah Muhammad with anything less than reverence.
It was the first time, but it wouldn't be the last. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. For the nation, it was a painful loss. For Malcolm X, it launched a personal crisis. The day after the assassination, Malcolm X made a remark that shocked both his followers and his enemies.
When you send your chickens out in the morning from your barnyard, those chickens will return that evening to your barnyard, not your neighbor's barnyard. I think this is a prime example of the devil's chickens coming back home to roost.
The public was enraged by his apparent irreverence. In his book, Malcolm insists he was misunderstood.
I said that the hating white men had not stopped with the killing of defenseless black people, but that hate, allowed to spread unchecked, finally has struck down this country's chief of state.
A furious Elijah Muhammad silences his minister for 90 days, forbidding him to preach in the temple. Malcolm is shocked, even though he knows there's another reason for the rift. Malcolm had recently discovered a scandal involving Elijah Muhammad.
Elijah Muhammad, the head of the movement, is the father of 8 children by 6 different teenage girls. 6 different teenage girls who were his private personal secretary.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I said to him, Aren't you worried about doing this? And smiling, he said, I'm probably a dead man already.
When he would be driving in the streets of New York, here, Manhattan, Nation of Islam members and informants would come up and grab the car door, and while he was at a stoplight and yank the door, "We're going to get you, we're going to get you."
The organization he built and believed in is turned against him. Malcolm now embraces Orthodox Islam, the religion practiced by millions around the world. In March of 1964, he decides to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. Every able-bodied Muslim is called upon to make the journey, or Hajj, once in a lifetime. For Malcolm X, the time has come. In the sacred city, he sees people of all races and nations humbly praying together. It's a revelation, but it's been coming a long time.
In Malcolm's own narrative, it appears that all of a sudden he understood that white people were good. But that's not really how it happened. Malcolm had way before that understood that white people were not the devils. But he wasn't able to explicitly articulate that. He couldn't come out the closet. He was in the closet about white people.
Back in the States, Malcolm takes a Muslim name befitting one who has completed the Hajj. El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. The man born Malcolm Little takes on yet another new name and a brand new perspective.
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white.
In a move that shocks many, he renounces his unconditional hatred of all white people. Everyone, he says, can help in the fight against racism.
Certainly. We will work with any group, organizations, or leaders in any way, as long as it's genuinely designed to get results.
In the last chapter of his narrative, Malcolm X seems to be saying goodbye. He talks about Islam, politics, and how white people can help in the struggle for equality. He mentions some regrets, such as never finishing school or not becoming a lawyer. And eerily, Malcolm foresees his own destruction.
Every morning when I wake up now, I regard it as having another borrowed day. In any city, wherever I go, making speeches, holding meetings of my organization, or attending to other business, black men are watching every move I make. I know, too, that I could suddenly die at the hands of some white racist. Anyhow, now each day, I live as if I'm already dead.
The autobiography of Malcolm X does not end with Malcolm X's words. Alex Haley's epilogue must relate the violent ending to the story. Late in the afternoon of February 21st, 1965, Malcolm X approached the podium at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. Betty and their 4 children looked on.
Assalamu alaikum.
Get your hand out of my pocket! Get your hand out!
Brother, please, hold it. Calm down, please, brother.
Malcolm was rushed to Columbia Presbyterian Hospital across the street. 15 minutes later, he was pronounced dead. He was 39 years old. Malcolm X spent fewer than 6 years in the public spotlight, yet his influence was profound and lives on in his words.
Yes, I have cherished my demagogue role. I know that societies often have killed the people who have helped change those societies. And if I can die, having brought my light, having exposed any meaningful truth that will help to destroy the racist cancer that is malignant in the body of America, then all of the credit is due to Allah. Only the mistakes have been mine.
Keep watching. Discussion topics and activity and resources for the autobiography of Malcolm X are up next on Assignment Discovery. Now that you've seen the autobiography of Malcolm X, talk about this. Malcolm X was only 37 years old when he began working with Alex Haley to write his autobiography. Why do you think Malcolm X decided to put his life story on paper at this young age? Now try this. Put the autobiography of Malcolm X in historical context. Using photos, drawings, writings, or old film footage, create a multimedia presentation that shows race relations in America from the 1930s to the end of the 1960s. Log on to DiscoverySchool.com for curriculum materials and resources to support the autobiography of Malcolm X. To learn more, Assignment Discovery suggests Malcolm X, His Life and Legacy by Kevin Brown.